Yeah, I guess I could watch a movie. What do I want to watch? Hey! Yeah, Robocop! This'll do. Yeah, I can't wait to watch... Wait. Well, I guess it looks like we're watching the remake. Oh, it's a Blu-ray. The film opens with Sam Jackson being Sam Jackson, meaning pissed off about something, and in this case, he's running a news show. We see that ED-209s and robot cops are already an invention in this universe, so I guess no groundbreaking technology is going to be made here. This film's heat instead lies in the fact that the US are divided on whether robots should be implemented at home, or solely for the purpose of war with other countries. As such, it uses these news scenes as a way to discuss the Dreyfus Act, which bans robots from military and police use within the US. The debates that do happen do seem quite realistic, and reflect the modern day setting of the film. This shows everyone watching the movie that there will be political overtones, and it probably won't include any 80s dance club scenes, which in all honesty is a bit of a downer to open any film with. Moving on, we're introduced to Alex Murphy, your typical badass cop. We see him not sticking to the rules, and learn he has something to prove due to his partner being hospitalized on their recent case. You know, because all action movie heroes need to be multi-layered. In the original movie, Murphy is a cop who's just transferred down to Detroit. That's it. Really, that's all the backstory you're given in the original. We move on to a staff meeting scene at Omnicorp, and learn Americans don't want a machine, they want a product with a conscience. So instead of taking the Hasbro route and developing a war-ready Furby, they think, let's sell America a cyborg. Around the same time as this, criminals from the opening scenes are out to finish the job, and pay a guy to put a bomb under Murphy's car while he's visiting his partner in the hospital. The bomb could easily have been remote detonated at the proper moment, and having him die at home plays into the emotions of the family as a driving device for the film, which, believe me, we're gonna get into later. The character who kills Robocop is just a hired goon. Now this makes sense, as obviously the main criminal isn't gonna do the dirty work himself, but having a guy who isn't even really a character in the movie kill the protagonist definitely takes away from the impact of it. I find myself not really caring that much about Murphy's revenge story here, because the film hasn't really established a clear villain yet. The original film, on the other hand, absolutely nails this. Every single member of the gang is responsible for Murphy's death in one of the most brutal and memorable death scenes in probably all of cinema. Now that is a death that's gonna piss a cyborg off.
Okay, let's get out of here.
Back in the reboot, we're greeted with a cool scene of a man with robot hands playing guitar, which introduces us to one of the only important characters in the film, and that's Gary Oldman. He's a scientist focused on creating cybernetic limbs. The film shows us he's a good guy because he's encouraging the rehabilitation of his cyborg guitarist patient. Although, he does come across as a bit of a misguided douche. I mean, could you seriously, personally guilt trip someone who looks like this? Yeah, I didn't think so. But now it's time to meet Robocop.
Well, give the man a hand!
Well, in the newer version, they did just that, by giving Robocop a hand. I'm assuming this is a throwback to them discussing saving his arm in the original movie, or either to make him more human/relatable to the public on some level. But it could just have easily been the science department budget was cut and they couldn't afford to make another robot hand. Stuff's probably expensive. I've heard there's a deleted scene in the film where they say it so he can give handshakes, but it may have been worth leaving that scene in the actual movie, because it would have explained a lot. They go on to compare Robocop versus the robot cops in a simulation test. The result shows Robocop is slower than the robot cops due to his human brain slowing him down. So the best solution they come up with to combat this is to remove the human element from Murphy during combat, basically leaving him with the illusion of free will. So essentially when Robocop is fighting, it's a machine that thinks it's Alex Murphy, and this shows us that Omnicorp essentially just wants a robot that looks like a human. So, surely it would have been faster to have just gone the Texas Chainsaw route and stapled a dead guy's face onto a robot. Omnicorp, I'm here all week if you're hiring. Anyway, to show us how effective he now is, they pit him against 54 robot enemies and Maddox, and watch as he destroys them all to the glorious song Hocus Pocus by Focus, which is as much fun to say as it sounds. All in all, it's a good typical action scene, but that's the problem. One guy shoots, the other 50 guys can't seem to hit anything, there's no real sense of where anyone is compared to each other, and then the good guy wins. Also, if you're wondering how he can suddenly defeat 54 robot enemies, basically they're not armed to damage him, only move him into Maddox's path. so that Maddox himself can shoot him, which at least gives the scene a lot more credibility. Due to the success of these tests, they decide it's time to introduce Robocop to the world through a major TV event, and of course, literally minutes before he goes on live national TV, they decide to fully update him with new crime database software. Exactly, what could go wrong, right? So obviously Quality Control decides to take a day off and they upload all the information of his own death into his head, causing him to have a seizure. To fix this seizure, they remove the majority of dopamine from his system, thus making him act more like a robot. Which you would think undermines the entire point of making him more relatable to humans. That being said, he walks out, blanks his family, analyzes the crowd, shoots and arrests a criminal. All in all, a good day's work and the public are happy. The weird part is they kind of just leave him like this over the next few days, which only proves my point that if the public really did just want a robot with a face, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre idea is starting to actually look viable. Seriously, Omnicorp, I'm not doing much. In the meantime, Sam Jackson's robot propaganda show is calling Americans #robophobics. He talks more about the Richard Dreyfuss Act, and I've already become seriously disinterested in all of this section of the film. So let's go back to the cool bits with the robot. After talking to his wife, he realizes his family is suffering, overrides his systems, goes home, researches his own death, and sets out for revenge in what turns out to be another decent action scene. Keeping with classic movie tropes, it turns out to be an inside job, with the Detroit City Police being involved in the arms dealings. Of course they were. Robocop broadcasts the arrest over the air before being manually shut down by Maddox from far away. Sellers, the owner of Omnicorp, uses the police incident to get the Dreyfuss Act removed and decides he has to get rid of Robocop. I'd like to also point out that this is the moment where he technically becomes the villain of the film. Up till now, he's pretty much just been a businessman. But now he's a villain. Reactivated and saved by Oldman, Robo heads out to stop the bad guy. Using his parkour senses, he's able to get past a bunch of ED-209s, ditch one of his arms in the process, and begin making it towards Sellers on the rooftop. This is where the film reintroduces the red bands. This film's equivalent of the fourth directive. The original movie shows that Robocop is programmed to not hurt any officers directly above him, leading to a few great scenes and the awesome ending of the original.
Dick, you're fired!
Thank you.
In this movie, the red bands work in the same way as that. Anyone in possession can't be targeted. But after being saved by his partner and making it to the rooftops, Robocop uses the power of family to overcome his programming and shoot Sellers. The film ends with the family finally getting their meeting, the Dreyfuss Act is reinstated, and Sam Jackson is pissed off.
The fact that this mother is not serving time in some federal penitentiary is a huge, hot, heaping pile of horse.
All's well that ends well. Since we've finished covering the movie, let's move on and talk about its main focus, which I feel is the family dynamic. Robocop 2014 uses this to keep the plot moving forwards, and uses his wife's intervention to make him break his programming, show us when he's not himself, and she even signs the release forms that lead to Murphy becoming Robocop in the first place. There's also a subplot of them being denied to see him throughout the movie, and the main emotional scene comes in the form of him meeting his son for the first time since the accident. The only thing is they make it so prominent that at times it feels like they're almost spoon-feeding you this information, and the pacing of the film does suffer a bit because of this. In the original, Murphy is declared dead, his family moves away and is only really ever shown during flashback scenes. These include when Murphy visits his home, and during his nightmares. Through clever cinematography, they managed to get across just how much family meant to Murphy, and you genuinely begin to feel like this is a character who has had everything taken away from him, in a way that the modern Murphy just hasn't. 2014 has many stories running at once. We have the family's point of view, we have Oldman's point of view, we have Omnicorp's point of view, we have the company's point of view, we have the criminal's point of view, and of course we have Robocop's point of view. The original, on the other hand, has two main stories. We get Murphy's point of view, and we get the criminal's point of view, which includes Omnicorp, because in this movie, they're one and the same. The film opens, the murder happens, Robocop is developed, he hits the streets, and then shortly after begins his quest for vengeance. It's a streamlined plot that still manages to include the same family elements and be just as driven by them, but it doesn't dedicate as many scenes to these as the 2014 version, which ensures the film keeps moving at a faster pace. Now, you're probably wondering, is there really much else I thought hurt the 2014 movie? The answer is yes. The lack of character development within Robocop 2014 causes there to be basically 5 characters you need to know. Murphy, his wife, Sellers, Oldman, and Maddox. Everyone else isn't really that important. The criminals all feel like petty criminals, the car bomber who kills Murphy is essentially faceless, and no other character really gets enough screen time to become overly relevant. In the original, the full cast of characters feels a lot more three-dimensional, from the conversations in the locker room towards the start of the movie, to every criminal character having his own personality. Dick Jones, Clarence Boddicker, Bob Morton, all three of these are interesting characters that drive the movie with their performances. When the lead character in your movie is a cyborg that can at times act pretty robotic, it's not a bad idea to surround him with strong characters to keep the movie flowing. With that said, 2014 really takes its time in establishing a villain. Having multiple villains is perfectly fine, it even leaves a lot more doors open for storytelling purposes, but having a strong established villain definitely stops things getting confusing. I mean, I could go on tangents and justify any character in this film as a villain. Let's take his wife for example. She signs the form setting all of this into motion and has a knack for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. The final scene would definitely be the one I'd point out for her being the villain. To the best of their son's knowledge, he's just seen his malfunctioning one-armed robot dad get shot while killing someone. Add that to the fact that he saw him die the first time around, and this kid is set up for a life filled with some very serious therapy. The mother contributed to that just as much as Sellers did. Obviously, she's not the villain of the movie, but you see my point, having one strong central villain, especially with all these other plots going on, helps keep things grounded. A final thing is ED-209s don't seem as threatening in the 2014 version, which I know when you look at this, compared to this, is probably pretty hard to believe. But bear with me, let's look at how ED-209's introduced in the original film together.
Mr. Kinney is going to help us simulate a typical arrest and disarming procedure.
Please put down your weapon. You have 20 seconds to comply. You now have 15 seconds to comply.
See what I mean? Even taking this into account, it still comes across as a pretty badass character. Now don't get me wrong, if you're looking for a decent Saturday night action film, Robocop 2014 will do the job. But if you're looking for the true experience of a badass cyborg taking out his hyper-violent revenge well surrounded by likable, believable extra characters, then this doesn't come close to the original 1987 Robocop.